How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yomi Chullin, Daf 17 of Shechita Chullin. Friends, Daf Yomi Chullin is an interesting daf. The first section, first of all, friends, it's Erev Shabbos, and I have a lot to do. So I might be rushing a bit because I need to get this done, and I haven't yet edited. So this is actually, it's Erev Shabbos. This is Sunday's stuff, but I haven't yet uploaded tomorrow's daf yet, and I have to record and edit, upload, and all that stuff within the next 2 hours or so. So I got a lot to do. So I think I might have to keep this moving a bit. It is an interesting daf. The first section I am calling Shechita throughout history. Maybe I should have called it Shechita throughout the ages. That would have been nice and poetic. Anyways, but it discusses Shechita and our relationship with eating animals in the Midbar versus in Eretz Yisrael versus in Galus. Machlekes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva on that. I believe that is an interesting topic. There was also a little bit of a surprising topic. It was a little surprising to me. I think I may not be the only one surprised about this mystery topic that we'll get to towards the end of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Very interesting. And then we discuss the halachos of the Shechita knife, specifically different types of nicks. It is kind of technical. I made some slides here for us to look at a few things. Honestly, it was a little hard to understand what a lot of the things were, but that is what we have on Daf Yomi Chullin. So friends, come join me. Let's study Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Chulin. It is certainly a very interesting daf, although we are going to have to keep things moving. Our daf today begins on Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis, about 10 or 15 lines or so from the bottom of Daf Tes Zayin Amud Beis. The Mishnah said, "Akel shechatin le'elam shechatin," that we have to explain what this means. But all shecht and forever shecht, hakol shechatin, hakol bishchita. What this means is that all things need to be shechted. Vafilu of, even birds. Because if you look at the pasuk that discusses Shechitas Chulin, it says v'zavachta mi bekarcha u'mitzoncha, that you'll slaughter your cattle, your flock. It doesn't say birds over there. That is learned out from a separate drash. So what the Mishnah is saying is that hakol shochatin, it means all thing. We slaughter all things, even birds. Hakol b'shchita, everything needs to be slaughtered. Vafilu of even birds. Le'olam shochatin, and we always shecht. Mantana, who is the Tana of our Mishnah, who is saying that we always shecht. Amarabba says Rabbi Yishmael. This is Reb Yishmael, the Sanya that we learned in the Brisa. In the context of Shechita, it says, Ki yarchiv Hashem aleikecha es gvulcha, that when the Rabbanu Shalom will give us Eretz Yisrael, kasher dibelach, as he says to you, v'amarta oichla basar, and you say, I'm going to eat basar, I'm going to eat meat. V'gom Rabbi Yishmael says, Rabbi Yishmael, loy bo'akosov ela lahatir loy besar taiva. Says Rabbi Yishmael, this pasuk is coming to allow non-sacrificial meat, taiva meat that you eat for dinner. Shabatchila neser lem besar taiva. That initially in the midbar, in the wilderness, if you wanted to eat meat, you brought a korban shlamim. You didn't just slaughter a sheep for dinner. Mishenichnasu la'uretz, but once the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, huter loem besar taiva, now all of a sudden they were allowed to just slaughter a sheep in their backyard and eat it for dinner. So according to Rabbi Yishmael, the Yidden in the wilderness only ate korbanos. If you wanted to eat meat, you brought a korban. Once the Yidden got to Eretz Yisrael, for the first time, they were able to just slaughter an animal and eat it for dinner without bringing it as a korban. So now says Rabbah, now that the Yidden are in Galus, right? Shegalinu me'artzenu, yachol yachzu li'isurin arishin. Is it possible that now meat will become usher once again, just like it was usher in the Vidbar? And since Memele we don't have a base Mikdash, we won't be able to eat meat. L'chach shaninu le'elam shechatin That's why the Mishnah, which we're saying is Rabbi Shmuel is saying le'elam shechatin, that we slaughter forever. Even in the Galus, we slaughter animals and we eat them. So Rabbah says the Mishnah is Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel said that in the wilderness there was no simply slaughtering animals and eating them. You had to bring them as a korban. Once the Yidden got to Eretz Yisrael, so they were allowed to slaughter animals and eat them. They didn't have to bring them to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash for as korbanos. And says Rabbah that our Mishnah is the author is Rabbi Shmuel, and he's saying that also nowadays post Churban, still we slaughter and we eat meat. Maskiv law Rav Yosef has a kasha on Rabbah. Olam shochatin ve'ochlim ibayle. Rav Yosef has two questions. Question number one is that when the Mishnah says the olam shochatin, the focus is on the shechita, that the shechita is forever. Whereas, really, if you think about it, based on the way that Rabbah was explaining that the Mishnah is Rabbi Shmuel, it's really more on the eating. Are you allowed to eat bisar taiva? Are you allowed to just eat random meat that is not korbanos? And he's saying, well, in the midbar, no. When the Yidden got to Eretz Yisrael, yes. Now in Galus, we can continue eating bisar taiva. It's really about can we eat, less of the focus on the actual shechita itself. And since the Mishnah says akol shochatin, the focus really should be on the shechita, not on the achila. Ve'od, and another question that Rav Yosef asks based on Rabbah's analysis, may ikara my time itzer in the wilderness. How come you weren't allowed to simply slaughter an animal and eat it outside your tent? How come you had to bring it to the Mishkan? The answer is Mishum dahavu mekarve leMishkan, because Sachakol they were not all that far away from the tabernacle. The tabernacle was right in the middle. They were all camped around us. Right, this week's parsha is Bamidbar. At least I'm recording mamish the last moments of the week of Parshas Bamidbar. Shabbos is going to be starting soon. Shabbos Parshas Bamidbar, where we talk about all the flags and the encampments of the Yidden around the tabernacle. So because the Yidden were so close to the tabernacle, so if you want to eat, so bring a korban, no? Well, vasof my time ishtaru, and when the Yidden got to Eretz Yisrael, why did they not have to just bring a korban? Why could they slaughter in their backyard? Well, as the pasuk says, where's the pasuk looking for? Ki yarchiv Hashem aleikecha es gvulcha. The Rabbeinu Shalom is going to give you mamish a whole country. And you're not going to be so close to the Beis HaMikdash to bring a korban every single day, every single time you want to eat meat. So that's why, because the Yidden now in Eretz Yisrael was spread out and they were far away from the Beis HaMikdash, that's why they were allowed to simply just eat bisar taiva, eat meat for, just slaughter it in the backyard and eat it. Right, so the my time issued to Mishkan, because at that once they got to Eretz Yisrael, they were far away from the Mishkan. The Kol Sheken Ashta, and all the more so now when Yidden are living in Babble, Ichveisvus, who knows where, the United States of America. The Kol Sheken Hashad Archikul Utfeiru Mamish, on the other side, they're very far away. Certainly, we won't be expected to bring our meat to Yerushalayim, and for there's also no Beis HaMikdash, but meaning if the reason for why the practice of only bringing korbanos ended was a far away thing, well, we are really far away right now. So therefore, Rav Yosef has two questions on Rabbah. Question number one is that the focus of the Mishnah is on Shechita, but based on Rabbah's explanation of Rabbi Shmuel, it's really about whether you can eat it or not. It's really more focused on the Achila. And secondly, if the reason why, according to Rabbi Shmuel, once the Yidden got to Eretz Yisrael, you could slaughter B'sar Taiva, was because people were far away from the Beis HaMikdash. It goes without saying that nowadays we would be allowed to eat B'sar Taiva for that reason. So Ella, Omer Rav Yosef, says of Yosef, Rabbi Akiva, it is in fact, Rabbi Akiva is the time of our Mishnah. The Sanya that we learn in Abraise, Ki Yirchok Mimcha Amokoim, that you will be far away from the Sheyivcha Hashem Aleikecha, Losum Shmoisham, you'll be far away from the Beis HaMikdash, V'zavachta mibukarcha umitzoncha, and you will slaughter from your cattle and your flock. Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Kiva, lo ba'kasuv ela le'esor lehen b'sar nechira. Shebatchila hutor lohem b'sar nechira. Mishnichus l'oretz neser lohem b'sar nechira. Rabbi Kiva has a very interesting opinion. Rabbi Kiva's opinion is that in the wilderness, in the midbar, the Yidden were allowed to eat their own meat. In the midbar, the Yidden were allowed to eat B'sar Taiva. And they didn't even need to shecht it. But B'sar Nechira is piercing, and not slaughtered, even if you pierced it. I don't know, maybe you killed it some other way. They would eat all types of B'sar Nechira, all sorts of B'sar Taiva. If they wanted to shecht an animal, then they had to bring that to the Beis HaMikdash. They had to bring that to the Mishkan. Right? If they wanted, they brought an animal to the Mishkan, they shechted it in the Mishkan and brought it as a korban. But they didn't have to. You could just kill an animal some other way and eat it in the wilderness. So again, Rabbi Kiva Omer Lo Ba Kosav El Lesor Loin B'sar Nechira, that the pasuk is going to say that now you can no longer eat animals that have been killed any way you want. Initially, they were allowed to eat animals slaughtered in non-shechita ways. But once the Yidden got into Eretz Yisrael, they weren't allowed to eat that anymore. They could only eat b'sar shchuta, right? V'zavachta, right? Shechita. Is it possible that? And so now Rav Yosef asks: is it possible that now the Yidden have been exiled? We can go back to eating b'sar nechira. We don't need b'sar shchuta. And that's why the Mishnah says, no, once there is shechita, it's shechita forever. And even now it's shechita. So this way we're really focusing on whether or not we require shechita or not, and not like Rab is saying about whether or not you're allowed to eat b'sar taiva or not. So it's more focused on the shechita. But my community, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel? Rabbi Kiva says Rabbi Kiva b'sar taiva lo itzer klal. Rabbi Kiva says b'sar taiva was never also, even in the wilderness, the Yidden were allowed to eat b'sar taiva. Rabbi Shmuel sover b'sar nechira lo ishtri klal, whereas Rabbi Shmuel says they were never allowed to eat non-slaughtered meat. Bishlam Rabbi Shmuel, I understand according to Rabbi Shmuel, han dichsiv v'shachat es ben abokar. The pasuk says by korbanis v'shachat shchita. El Rabbi Kiva, my v'shachat. According to Rabbi Kiva, why does it say shchita davka? Kachim shiny. Rabbi Kiva says, well, because that's talking about korbanis. Korbanis, of course, you're going to slaughter. Require proper shchita. Bishlam Rabbi Shmuel, I understand according to Rabbi Shmuel, han dichsiv atzoin va'ubakar yishachit loem. I think it's yishachit, right? Yeah. That after the Yidden complained and the Rabban Shalom says, all right, fine, I'll give you all the meat you want. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Atzonu vakur yishachit lohem." You can't possibly. How could you possibly slaughter enough flock and cattle for these Yidden? And it says yishachit avka shchita. Elo Rabbi Kiva, my atzonu vakur yishachit lohem. Yinachir lohem mibaylei. But according to Rabbi Akiva, why does it say atzonu vakur yishachit shchita? Could even be nechira. So nechira shalayin is shchitasim. Well, their nechira, their piercing, their killing some other way, is effectively the equivalent of their shchita. So shchita works just fine. I understand, according to Rabbi Shmuel, the pasuk says, the Mishnah teaches in the context of kisui adam. It says that if one slaughters, v'nisnav l'biyodon, becomes nevela, v'anocher, or if one pierces, doesn't do a proper shechita, v'ame'aker, or I guess rips out like the tricky and esophagus and stuff, doesn't do a proper shechita either. So partim l'chasos, you don't need to do kisur adam. So nocher, so we see that nocher is an improper form of shechita. So that makes sense according to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva, am I potter milchasos? According to Rabbi Kiva, why are you potter from kisur adam? I thought nechira is a valid type of shechita. Hov itzer, says Rabbi Kiva. Yeah, but once it's been made aser, it is aser. At this point, you have to do a proper shechita. Bishlam Rabbi Kiva, I understand according to Rabbi Kiva, the Amr b'sar taiva lo itzer klal. I understand according to Rabbi Kiva, who says that in the wilderness they were allowed to consume b'sar taiva. That when the pasuk talks about slaughtering chulin, and eating meat, it says katzviva ka'ayil, that it's like the deer, it's like the what's an aisle? What is an aisle? Some kind, one of those, like, I think it's like one of those animals. Yeah, one of those animals that runs away from lions and stuff. And oh gosh, what an ant? No, let me look it up quickly. What? I actually didn't. It's one of those classic biblical animals. Let's see. Aisle is a. Yeah, it says, where am I? Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Here, ayal. A heart. I don't know. What's a heart? I don't know. The deer or the heart. Anyways, so I understand according to Rabbi Akiva that be'etzem, when it says that you could shecht animals, and that when you come to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to shecht it says katzviva ka'ayal, like the deer and the heart, because anyways you were allowed to already eat the deer and the heart. Ela Rabbi Shmuel tzviva ayal gufe mi'aveshari. But what do you, according to Rabbi Shmuel, I thought you weren't allowed to eat b'sar taiva. So what do you mean you can eat it like the deer and the heart? So ki asur achmana behema dechazel akrava aval chayed dechazel akrava lo asur achmana. Says Rabbi Yishmael that even in the wilderness, when we said that you had to bring animals as korbanos if you wanted to eat them, that's specifically animals that are korbanable. Sheep, goats, cows. But if you wanted to, even in the wilderness, if you wanted to eat a deer or a hart, you could. That obviously you weren't going to bring as a korban because you don't bring deers and harts as korbanos. So those you would have been able to eat anyways, according to Rabbi Shmuel. But Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, every b'sar nechira shechnisu Yisrael imoin la'aretz mau. Rabbi Shmuel asks, according to Rabbi Akiva, who said that in the wilderness the Yidden were allowed to eat non-slaughtered meat. Well, then what happened once the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael and they had some non-slaughtered meat with them? Can they eat it in Eretz Yisrael? So Amos, when? If you're asking me during the 7 years that the Yidden were engaged in battles in order to capture Eretz Yisrael, were they allowed to eat this b'sar nechira? Listen to this, friends. Hashta davar tomei ishtari lehu hakasuv. Dichsiv ubatim leim kol tuv v'gomer v'amar Rab Yirmiyah bar'aba omer Rab kasli dechazire b'sar nechira mibaya. You hear this? When the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, and for 7 years they were capturing the land, if when they got to a town and they conquered the town and they were going through the house and seeing what there is to eat, and they found bacon, they could have eaten the bacon. It says you're going to find houses, bottom leim kol tuv. You're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, you're going to be fighting and capturing land, capturing ground, and it says you're going to find houses that are maleim kol tuv, even filled with bacon. You can eat that. They were allowed to eat mamish tarfus while they're at war. And the Rambam even says that this doesn't just apply to the 7 years that they capture. Whenever the Yidden go to war, if you don't have anything else to eat, you're starving, but if you're hungry and there's nothing else to eat, you can eat tarfus, according to the Rambam. The Rambam disagrees. But for the 7, so therefore we're saying that if when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael and they were capturing the land, they didn't have to worry about Halachos kashrus. So a kosher animal that was slaughtered and a non-kosher, right? If you can be eating pig, so certainly you can eat kosher animals that were slaughtered in a non-kosher way. Rather, it's talking about after the 7 years of conquest. Alternatively, you could say that the question is also about the 7 years that they were conquesting. But maybe what was allowed when we're saying that Hilchos Kashrus were suspended during the 7 years of conquest and they were conquesting and needed stuff to eat, maybe that is Davka things that they capture, davka, kashrus is suspended in that context. They do lo ishtri, but their own meat from the wilderness that wasn't slaughtered, maybe that would not be okay. Teku, it is a tie. Amar Rabba says, Rabba, Shanis akol shechitin la'olam shechitin. If we look at our Mishnah had said, hakol shochatin, la'olam shochatin, and bakol shochatin. So we got to figure out what's what here. Amar Rabba, Shanis hakol shochatin, la'olam shochatin, bakol shochatin, my mishanisle. What is bakol shochatin? If you're going to say, yeah, you could slaughter with anything, whether with a flint, whether with glass, reed. But one second, bakol shochatin needs to be similar to hakol shochatin. So if hakol shochatin is a reference to people who is allowed to slaughter, okay, so then bakol shochatin also would be related to who or what is allowed to slaughter. The anach benishchatin, but if it's like we said earlier that hakol shochatin means even birds, if we're focused on what is getting slaughtered, well then anami benishchatin, well then bakol shochatin is also going to be nishchatin. Elo amar rave hakol shochatin chada lasuye kusi v'chada lasuye yisrael mumar. Rather, at the very beginning of the Masechta, when we said, what did we say? Hakol shochatin u'shchitas ksher. So we said hakol shochatin there, and in this last pasuk that we also just in the recent Mishnah, it also says hakol shochatin. So says Rava that when it says hakol shochatin twice, essentially on Daf Beis and on Daf Tezvav Mud Beis, so chada l'suye kusi. One is to say that a kusi you can eat a shechita, right? We said you just have to kind of make sure that he's going to eat it first. You saw a mummer, or you saw a mummer, right? We said you saw a mummer l'davar echad. He's allowed to slaughter. The olam shochatin, ben bayom, ben balayl. When we said that you can always slaughter, it means whether during the day or even at night, as long as you have a torch. Ben barosh agad, ben barosh asvina, whether on top of the roof or on a boat. And bakol shochatin, you can also slaughter ben batzor, with flint, ben beschuches glass, ben bekramis shalkane, or with a reed. Okay, and now we move on to the next section of the daf, which talks about the halachos of the shechita knife, basically different nicks, and how we deal with different nicks and things, and testing the knife and checking the knife. I didn't understand exactly. There were some things that were like very technical and hard to exactly understand. Like you need to kind of have a diagram, and I couldn't really find diagrams for it. I looked in the Hillel book and in the art school. Between the two, I found different things. So I'm going to kind of try my best here. Anyways, okay, I prepared a few slides and things. Okay, so chutz mi magul katzer v'amegera, we said that you can't slaughter with a harvesting sickle because that's serrated, or a saw. Avod Shmuel pagam v'shader shachule kimegera shaninu. Avod Shmuel's father, what he would do is he would take a shechita knife and like make some kind of a nick in it, and he sent it off to Eretz Yisrael to get feedback. And then they would send it back, and they would say, yeah, this is kosher, this is not kosher, and he would make some other tweaks and send it back to hear what the halach would be in that case. And then they sent back and they said, look, kimegera shaninu, what's not allowed is like a saw. So I have a slide here, and that seems to be a reference to, if you look at this knife that I made in this slide, that little like triangle kind of nick. And they kind of try, this is going to be important, okay? This is like a triangle nick. It's angled on both sides. It's not a right angle. It's not a right triangle. It's a non-right triangle. Well, what's the name of is there a name for a non-right triangle? Is that just like a triangle? There's obtuse, there's acute, there's right angle, and what the heck is this? Just a triangle? What do all the angles in a triangle add up to what? To 180, right? So what's 180 divided by 3? This is probably, does that mean that each angle here is 60 degrees? Does that make sense? I think so. I don't know. Do we have any math whizzes here? Geometry whizzes? Tanach Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Sakin sheyeshba pigimis harbe, a knife that has a lot of nicks, or like problems with it. Tidon kimegera, it will be treated like this saw, like knife, and it's puzzle. But if it only has one, I'm going to call it like a nick. I don't know what else to call it. Ogeres psula misuchseches ksher. So if it's ogeres, if it gathers, kind of, and that would be like we just saw a minute ago, this like triangle kind of thing. But if it is entangled, I think is the definition, which is, as you can see, this is more like a right angle. So if you so in the first example, if you like slide your finger down the knife, which is I think an extremely sharp knife, so wouldn't you like cut your finger off? I don't know, but you would like, whether you're going left to right or right to left, your like hand would kind of like fall into that notch, into that nick or whatever. Now on the other side, though, is just like a right angle. So the double the angles on both sides, right? The ogeres, so that would be possible, but misuchseches, the one with the right angle, would be ksher. Heichi dami ogeres, heichi dami misuchseches. What's the deal with ogeres? What's the deal with misuchseches? Omer Rabbi Lazar, ogeres mishtei ruchis, right? Ogeres is from the two sides, like you could see in this slide, and mishtei ruchis and misuchseches miruach achas, and like you could see in this slide, it's like a right angle kind of thing. There's only kind of an angle on one side of it. Okay. Umashna, where am I? Mashna mishtei ruchis de. Now, why are we saying that the first type with the two, the regular triangle? So, mashna mishtei ruchis, that we say it's not okay. The morsha kama machlish, the morsha basra baza, that if you slaughter with it, so then I guess when you're slaughtering, I guess the first point is going to kind of cut through the skin, and the second point is going to like tear the esophagus, I guess. Murach achas nami, but won't you say the same thing even for a right angle kind of situation? The sakina machlish, that the knife will kind of get through the skin, morsha baza, and then the point will tear through the esophagus. The koyim aresha de sakina. Well, in the right angle one, it's towards the front of the knife, which means that you kind of will, where the right angle nick thing is, it will just be getting through the skin, but by the time you get to the esophagus and trachea, like the important stuff, it would already be a smooth experience. Sof ki ozla machlisha ki asa baza, but still, I mean, when you slaughter, you go back and forth. So even if in one direction it's smooth, when you're going back, back in the other direction, it's going to hit the nick again and tear stuff. So well, if it's a long enough knife that you can just slaughter in one direction. Rava says, Rava gimel midos besakin. There are three measures when it comes to a knife. Ogeres, there's ogeres, like we saw, that was the double angle. Lo yishchot v'imshachat shchitaso psula. That's ma'akev. It's possible if you shech with that. Misuchseches, the right angle one. Lo yishchot, don't slaughter, but lechatchila v'imshachat shchitaso ksher. But b'diavad, if you slaughter with it, it is ksher. Ola v'yored besakin shoched la ba lechatchila. So this I couldn't find anywhere, so I had to kind of do my best to try to understand what it is. This is what I came up with. That basically, this could have started out as like, a regular kind of nick, but then they tried to smooth it out. So there's no actual kind of angle here. They kind of smoothed it out. And it just kind of ola v'yored. It goes up and then down, but there's no angles for anything to get caught on. So that's how I understood what it is. Amar Ravuna Brei de Rav Nechemya le Rav Ashi. Amar la Mishmei de Rava says, Ravuna Brei de Rav Nechemya to Rav Ashi, that you said to us in the name of Rava, Misuchseches psula, that the right angle situation is psula, ve'al misuchseches ksher, but I thought misuchseches is ksher, lokasha kancha olich vehevi. So he said if you go back and forth, it's psula, kancha olich vehevi. If you go in one direction, it's okay. Amar Rav Acha Brei de Rav Avya le Rav Ashi, says Rav Acha Brei de Rav Avya to Rav Ashi, Damya l'sa'asa mai amar le man yoiv la mibsari v'achlinun. If it's similar to like a wheat stalk or something, that I should have gotten a photo. But basically, if you ever look at like a wheat stalk, there's like there's the wheat kernels, and then there's like these like grasses kind of coming out from them. So I found like a photo online, just Googling online. This like is kind of what we're dag-nabbit. I wish I would have gotten actually a photo of the wheat, but wheat, there's like the wheat stalk and there's like these like grasses coming out of it. So what you see here is like, it's hard to envision, but like this, I guess, is probably like a knife, and there's like those like shoots and I imagine this would only be good if you're like going in one direction, because once you go back, I mean, you're gonna tear the heck out of like the organs. So I imagine, I don't know, maybe I don't understand it right. It was really hard to find out what exactly this means, but I hope that maybe if I can, it's possible that by the time you look at this slide, I'll have a photo of like wheat, so you can actually see like what I'm talking about, the grasses coming out of the wheat, and then you'll be able to see the photo here. But it's very weird. I guess that's like a blade of sorts, and I guess as long as you go in like one direction, that should be okay. If you go back, you'll probably do some real tearing damage. I don't know. It's a little bit hard for me to understand it. Anyways, so again, Amalei Rav Acha Bred Rav Avia Rav Ashi Dami L'Sai Samai. So what about this kind of wheat thing? So Amalei Man Yoiv Lan Mibsari V'Achlin, and if only we had such meat slaughtered in that way, and we would eat it, and we would really enjoy ourselves. Amar Rav Chizda says of Chizda Minayin Lebedika Sakim in the Torah. How do we know that checking a knife is midah oraisa? Shenema v'shachatem bozeh v'achaltem. There's a pasuk from Shmuel Aleph. After the Yidden defeated the Philistines, so they were enjoying the spoils of war, and they were eating animals and stuff, and word got back to Saul that they were eating with the blood. So he says, that's it, everybody come here and slaughter your animals in front of me, so we can make sure that nobody's eating blood. It says, you will slaughter here, v'achaltem. So we see essentially that we want to say from here that they were showing King Saul their knives. So Pshita, what do you mean? I don't need a pasuk. Obviously, you have to check the knives. Nokab treifa bayobedika. I understand. It goes without saying that you have to check your knives, because if you make like a piercing in the esophagus or something, and you make a hole, so then the shechita is psula. Obviously, you have to check your knife to make sure it's a kosher knife before you do shechita. So lachacham kamina. No, we're saying, how do we know that you have to show your knife to a sage? But Reb Yochanan had said that the old reason, where did he say this? And Daf Yud, wow, it's a week ago already. Reb Yochanan said on Daf Yud that the whole point of showing a knife to a sage is just to honor the sage. It's not midah oraisa. Midah Rabbanan, you're right. It's midah Rabbanan v'kra asmachta ba'amud. The pasuk by Saul is just an asmachta, but it is in fact midah Rabbanan. B'mayrova badkila b'shimsho, so they would check their knives in the sun. Either that means that they would use the sunlight to get a good look at it, or they would check the shadow. They would block the sun with the knife and have a look at the shadow to see if they saw any nicks. B'narda badkula b'maya. Narda, they would check it out in water. Either they would put it in water and see if there was like any peculiar movements in the water because there's some peculiar nicks in the knife, or maybe they just like put drops of water on the blade, and then if there was a nick, it would fall to the bottom of the knife instead of keep on going. But they would somehow check with water. Rav Sheshes badakla b'reish lishnei, my oh my. Rav Sheshes would check his shechita knife on his tongue. I don't, how? Rav Acha bar Yaakov badakla b'chut asayra. Rav Acha bar Yaakov would inspect his knife with a hair. You would put the hair down the blade and saw if it got stuck or anything. Besura amrei bisra achla bisra livodka. In Surah they would say, since this knife is going to have to cut through flesh, to test it, you have to see how it cuts through flesh. Therefore, you're going to have to, either use your tongue like Rav Sheshes did, or your finger. That's crazy. Do we have any sharshtim here at Babble on Talmud? Reb Zach, we had discussed maybe you were going to learn Shechita. Did you do it? Can you answer our Shechita questions? So anyway, you cut off your fingers every time you need to check the knife. Amar Papa says, Papa tzricha bedika abisur v'atufra. You need to check the knife on flesh, like the flesh of your finger, I guess, or your tongue. V'atufra, and your fingernail. Amar Ravina Rav Ashi, Amalan Rav Sama B'Rav Shasha Mishmech. Says Ravina to Rav Ashi, that Rav Sama B'Rav Shasha says in your name to Amalan Le Mishmech the Rava that you said to him in the name of Rava. Sricha B'Dika Abisova Atufra, that you have to check the knife on flesh and also with a fingernail. Check I think slide the fingernail down the knife to see if there are any nicks. Ve'atlasa, would the knife like cut through your fingernail? Oh, that sounds horrible. Ve'atlasa ruchasa, and also on three sides, the blade and the two sides of the blade. Amalei abisra ve'atufra ami. So Rav Ashi responds, yes, I did say that you have to check on flesh and on a fingernail. Ve'atlasa ruchasa lo ami, but I did not say that you need the three sides of the knife, the blade and the two sides. I didn't say that. Just the blade is enough. Those that Rav Ashi says, yes, I did say that about the flesh and the fingernail and the three sides. But I didn't say it in the name of Rava. Ravina Rav Acha Bre de Rava. Havi Yasvi Kame de Rav Ashi Aisu Sakin the Kame de Rav Ashi, and they brought a Shechita knife before Rav Ashi the vodka to check it. Amalei Rav Acha Bre de Rava, and he said to Rav Acha Bre de Rava, Bidka, check it. Vodka Atrufa V'Abisra V'Atzlas Ruchasa, and Rav Acha Bre de Rava checked the knife on flesh and on a fingernail and on its three sides, the point, the blade, and the two sides of the blade. Amar, like the walls of the blade. Amar le shkoyich v'chein Amar Rav Kahana. Says shkoyich, it so says Rav Kahana. Rav Yemer Amar Atufa V'Abisra Tzricha says Rav Yemer, you only need to check how it cuts through flesh and check it on your fingernail. You don't need to check the sides, right? The blade plus the sides. You don't need to check the sides. Milo, Amr Abzera Mashmuel, did we not see? Where was this? On Daf Ches. Did we not see on Daf Ches? The Abzera says in the name of Shmuel, Libein Sakin, if you get a knife red hot, V'shachat ba, and you slaughter with it shchita suksher, it's kosher shchita shechiduda kadam lelibuna, because the sharpness, the blade of the knife is going to cut before the red hotness of it is going to burn. The kashlana ikat stadin, and we asked, what about the sides of the pipes as you're cutting through them? Aren't they going to get burnt by the red hot knife? The amiran, and we said beis shchita mirvach ravach. We had said that as you cut through the throat, it opens up, and therefore nothing, as you cut through it, only the point is only the tip of the knife, the point of the knife, the blade of the knife, the sharpness is going to be cutting through the pipes, but as they cut through it, opens up and nothing's going to be touching the side of the knives. The same thing here, you don't need to check the sides of the knife, because as you cut through, the Beis HaShrita is going to open up and nothing will actually be touching the side of the knife and won't be tearing through anything. Friends, that was Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Chullin. Sorry, I kind of rushed through it, but it's getting late over here. On Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Chullin, we had initially talked about Shechita throughout history, meaning we had talked about, because the Mishnah had said La'olam Shochatin, that we always shech them. What we were saying that what that means is that even after the Galus, because we saw the Machloksin or Bishmael and Rabbi Kiva, Bishmael said that in the wilderness they were not allowed to eat meat that was not korbanos. If you wanted to eat meat, you had to offer it as a korban, which we ultimately then clarified only if we're talking about sheep, goats, and cows that could be offered as a korban. If you wanted to eat them in the wilderness, you had to bring it as a korban. You couldn't just eat besar taiva. We did point out, however, since deer and hart, they can't be offered as korbanos, so those you could have just eaten in the wilderness. Once Yidden got to Eretz Yisrael and they were too far away from the Beis HaMikdash, so then they didn't all have to only bring korbanos. And we're saying that post Churban, they were, however, able to continue eating meat. Rabbi Akiva said that even in the wilderness they could have eaten sheep and goats and not have to bring them as a korban, and they could slaughter, they could kill them however they wanted. But once the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, it was limited to Shechita, and then that persisted. To this day, we only slaughter. We saw use Shechita. We saw something super interesting, which is that when the Yidden went into Eretz Yisrael, and when they were capturing Eretz Yisrael for the first 7 years, when they would roll into a town, and they would go into a house and it was filled with whatever food was there, they were allowed to eat that food. They're allowed to eat whatever was there. Even if it's, what's that stuff? Bacon. Even if it's bacon. And the Rambam says that this even applies outside of the scope of, and even I think if I understand from the Rambam correctly, I think he's saying even milchemes reshus. You go into a new area, and you can, if you need food to eat, you can eat even complete, typhus. And then we talked about the halachos of the shechita knife and different nicks that would be possible or potentially kosher in knives. We talked about how to check a shechita knife on flesh and on your fingernail. The Rambam Taka says that you also do the 3 sides of it. So very, very interesting. We talked a little bit about showing the knife to a chacham. Friends, that was Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Chullin. Have a great day. Cheers.